In May 2022, only a few months after the U.S. Department of Commerce sanctioned 2 Israeli spyware companies, Google Threat Analysis Group announced it was actively tracking over 30 companies that were selling exploits and/or surveillance capabilities to governments. Governments around the world have conducted surveillance of their citizens and foreign nationals, both inside and outside their borders to varying degrees. Surveillance companies like the Vienna-based DSRIF sell to EU governments, Italy-based RCS Lab-developed Hermit spyware, Israel hosts numerous spyware companies, and the US hosts numerous surveillance companies that sell to the US federal and local governments. While the list is countless and growing, for the purpose of this video, we will focus on a few companies to analyze the nature of this industry and toward the end discuss a few concerning implications. You may also find this video on our technical channel, where we provide technical explainers and analysis. This channel is dedicated to non-technical cybersecurity content for the non-technical professional. Commercial surveillance and spyware products have had both good and bad use, such as the 2018 arrest of the owner of an abandoned KFC property in an Arizona border town, who was allegedly involved in smuggling drugs from Mexico through a tunnel below the U.S. border. Reportedly, authorities uncovered it using phone location data, likely from Locate X. More on that later. According to CBS, Shalif Fulio, the CEO and co-founder of the notorious Pegasus spyware developer, NSO Group referred CBS to the head of an unnamed Western European intelligence agency, who confirmed Shalif Fulio's statement that Pegasus has been a game-changer in foiling attacks by European jihadists, as well as combating drug and human trafficking rings. According to Shell's interview with INET News, Pegasus spyware was even used to monitor communication between El Chapo's lawyers and Mexican actress Kate Del Castillo, which eventually led to El Chapo's capture. But given the corruption of the Mexican government, it is widely believed that Pegasus spyware was then used to spy on political opponents and journalists, and may have even led to journalists' murder. Victims of unethical commercial surveillance include government officials, political candidates, human rights activists, journalists, business people, among others around the world. Pegasus was found on phones of murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi's family members. According to former NSA employee Edward Snowden, it is standard practice to avoid directly hacking the victim because it leaves too much evidence. The Israeli spyware companies are known to sell to governments such as Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and others who do not have a good record on human rights or free speech. The U.S. government buys commercial surveillance products too. The FBI, CBP, ICE, OFAC, DOJ, U.S. Marshals, Army, Coast Guard, DEA, Department of Transportation, and IRS all use Babel Street products, which includes Locate X that tracks phone locations through location data gleaned from apps, and Babel X, which mass collects information from social media. From the FBI's solicitation, we know that Babel X surveys a wide variety of social media platforms, including these. In 2022, atlasofsurveillance.org shows about 800 police departments are using facial recognition technology, 187 are using predictive policing. Both analyze data from a variety of sources, including from social media skimming and data brokers who obtain information from apps installed on people's phones. Essentially, the government buys their way around the Fourth Amendment. The surveillance industry is very lucrative. Governments used to have limited options, but now have an ecosystem to buy spying tools from. In early 2021, according to public documents, the FBI purchased 5,000 licenses for Babel X. According to government procurement records, the FBI paid a Babel X reseller around $5 million for the first year of the contract. The contract is likely a multi-year contract worth around $30 million. Offensive cyber is a big industry in Israel. Industry experts say it generates around $1 billion in annual sales. And in many ways, it is just like any other startup ecosystem. For example, the spyware company Candir seems just like any other high-growth startup. The company grew from 11 employees in 2015 to 150 in 2020. According to public-facing documents relating to a lawsuit by a former employee against the company, they had sales around $10 million in 2016. By 2017, it was $30 million, likely from multi-year contracts. They also had a $367 million sales pipeline. Candir was valued at $90 million in 2019. The documents state the extent of the sales activity included all the world's continents and opportunities in more than 60 countries. The scope of their deals ranged from $500,000 to $20 million. Just like many other startup ecosystems, they are tight-knit. According to Citizen Lab, an early investor in NSO Group became one of the largest shareholders in Candir shortly after its founding and was on its board of directors. Kandahar was and may still be represented by the same law firm and uses the same employee equity and trust administration services company. Like Pegasus and other Israeli spyware companies, Kandahar seems to recruit former members of the Israeli Defense Force Signals Intelligence Unit 8200. Similarly, Babel Street, the developer of Babel X and Locate X, sales went from $64,000 in 2016 to more than $2.1 million in 2017 to nearly $5.3 million in 2018. Babel was founded by a U.S. Navy officer and regularly recruits insiders from Washington, including former generals, Pentagon officials, and CIA members. There is one key difference between the spyware and or surveillance industry and other startup ecosystems: secrecy. The commercial spyware companies like Kandahar have no website. They operate through a complex, obfuscated chain of shell companies, often registered in different countries, that seem to periodically reshuffle, rename, and transfer ownership. Their employees do not even show their employment on LinkedIn. Other companies seem to maintain a public face, but keep the spyware and surveillance products and operations in the dark. Babel Street also goes to great lengths to keep its surveillance secret. Their use was first discovered by Tech Inquiry's Freedom of Information Act request. Babel Street does not mention Locate X in public-facing marketing materials, and its federal contracts state the existence of the data is confidential information. Their terms of use forbid law enforcement from using the technology as evidence or even mentioning it in legal proceedings. Although courts typically have not taken a favorable stance to terms like that, the surveillance seems to fall into three categories. The most publicized and intrusive, but least reaching category is spyware, which is basically malware installed on a target device for the purpose of exfiltrating data. A less publicized surveillance is signals-based surveillance, which captures data from signals such as cellular signals, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, or any other signal. While technically also considered signals intelligence, the least publicized but most wide-reaching is web surveillance. It aggregates information from social media, public forums, data from apps, data brokers, and anywhere of interest on the internet, often indiscriminately. Many of these companies sell to less than ethical governments. Pegasus is believed to have been used by governments in these countries, and Kandahar is believed to have been used by governments in these countries. Often when the spyware is found being used for unethical purposes, the developer hides behind their terms of service that forbid some activities, at least on paper. But many of these spyware technologies are deployed as standalone, off-the-shelf products that cannot be monitored or terminated by the manufacturer after their sale, giving them little capability to enforce any terms. Most laws are outdated and do not cover much of the signals intelligence surveillance. The technology often lacks accountability and is rife with abuse. Many experts point out a more concerning implication. It is only a matter of time before these technologies and the associated exploits are reverse engineered and become even more widely available, even on the black market.